Wait, what? I can do that? This is Eric Bell with Wait, what? Financial matters that matter for business and the people that own them. Welcome to this episode of Wait, What? Financial Matters That Matter. This is Eric Bell, and I'm fortunate today to have Dr. Denice Hinden with me. She is the principal owner, or one of the principal owners, her and her husband, of Managence, that I would categorize as a leadership training organization. I believe you started the firm about 12 years ago, Denice?
Actually, we started the firm 20 years ago.
20 years. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I know we just met recently. Denice, you have an extensive background in working with individuals in the crisis management space, dealing with runaways and homeless children and other challenging areas that most of us, don't have the skills to perform in. As we discussed a couple of weeks ago, you bring a certain calmness to the conversation. As far as I'm concerned, you're a good listener. It seems today that leaders or heads of organizations, it's hard for them to see all the game when they're in the middle of it. And I think that your firm, if correct me if I'm wrong, but your firm provides the coaching necessary to take leadership to the next level and ultimately the company to the next level.
That's really our goal. I started my career, Eric. This is really the second phase of my career. The first phase of my career was working as a practitioner in the nonprofit sector. So my very first job, if you will, I was the administrative assistant to a 24-hour crisis hotline and suicide prevention center.
Wow.
And all of the people that worked the phones, if you will, we were all volunteers. And we had incredible training in the skill of listening and not judging, and not making assumptions about what the person on the other end needed, the other person on the other end of the phone needed, but really focused on trying to understand what they needed and seeing how we could help. And I had no idea then that training would actually be so instrumental in what we do today with leaders.
I know you have a PhD, but you have also some other initials after your name. What do those mean?
Thanks. Yeah. Well, my PhD is in public administration.
Okay.
And I am also a professional certified coach through the International Coach Federation. So that's the PCC after my name. And I have certifications in two frameworks for leadership development. One is called Energy Leadership, that was created by Bruce Schneider. And the other one is Conversational Intelligence, that was created by Judith Glaser.
Okay. I got to ask you this question, Denice. How did you come up with the name Managence?
So Managence is the confluence of the first part of the word management and the last part of the word performance. And my husband's former business partner, he passed away now, but Rick listened to me talk about what I do now a little more than 20 years ago, and not familiar with it, came back and said, yeah, you do Managence. And I was like, what? Never heard of that. He said, yeah, you work with managers and leaders and you help them perform better. Managence. And the name stuck.
There you go. Because it wasn't in the dictionary, so I thought I had to ask. How would I use a meeting facilitator to possibly impact the business's bottom line?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Meeting facilitators bring groups and teams together to get on the same page about how to accomplish something.
So what is a meeting facilitator, just by definition? Just someone who's leading the group or the discussion?
Someone who designs, and plans how the discussion is going to happen.
Okay.
And then actually executes on the plan to help the discussion happen.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of topics would a meeting facilitator work on or work towards with a business?
Yeah, so the goals of meeting facilitation are unlimited. We commonly work on helping new teams think about how they're going to work together so that they get off on a really good start. We help businesses create plans for the future, like the direction that they want to go in. It could be a new business that's trying to create its plan for how it wants to develop as a business, or it could be a very seasoned business thinking about the future, of its business. We also help businesses work on really like breaking through really difficult issues. So, for example, recently we helped a business that also has a philanthropic arm. So there was some tension between the boards of the two different businesses. And they had really been arguing, if you will, for a number of months. And one of the boards wanted to walk away from the other board, but the reality was they really need each other. And so the primary organization invited us in to help them figure out how to create the table for a really productive conversation so that everybody could get their concerns out on the table, everybody could think together about the value of the partnership that they have, and create a pathway forward. I'm glad to say we were successful.
So it seems like a third-party intervention is a good solution a lot of times because somebody has their side, there's the other side, somewhere in between, there's a truth or the middle.
Yes. And often clients tell us that one of the reasons that they hire us is that we don't have to know anything about their business. In fact, they prefer it that way so that we can be as objective as possible, so that we don't come in, with a particular point of view about one side's interests or the other side's interests, but we really come in to listen to everybody's interests and help them think together, what's a pathway or option to move forward.
You and I were talking on the phone, and a lot of times the problem with the organization is the owner, and he doesn't realize that. How do you deal with that? That's kind of it's the owner of the company. He thinks it's my way or the highway because I started this. He's now advanced in age, been in the company for many years, and he just doesn't know how to shift gears with today's economy, the social media, all the different things that are out there.
Yeah, another great question. I think, what we encourage leaders to do is take a breath and sit back and trust that other people that they bring into a conversation are going to have important perspective for them to consider. And the more that they're willing to stop and listen, and not try to create the answers while they're listening to the conversation, but actually just really listen first and build trust by inviting other people in to the discussion, we find that it usually creates openings, that business owners didn't even know, they didn't even know what they didn't know,
right.
Until they created that listening space.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you and I talked about this over the phone too, a week or so ago. Are leaders made? Can you make a leader, or are leaders just kind of natural? I always thought leadership was something natural that people had. They kind of grew up that way as being a leader, and they just, became stronger as they got older.
I think that there are people who have innate qualities of leadership, but in my experience, people can absolutely learn the skill and ability, and develop the ability of leadership. I was working with a woman leader over the last couple of years when in one of the coaching spaces that I work. And when she first came to me with the opportunity to do some coaching, she said she lacked self-confidence, that she saw opportunities for the business that she was working in. She was on the senior leadership team, but she didn't know how to bring those ideas forward. She felt afraid to do that. And there was something about our interview that intrigued her, and so she decided to select me to work with her. Mm-hmm. Fast forward to really this week when I talked to her again. She's now the CEO of that company. Wow. And in the last year, guided that organization to that business, I should say, to bring in $1 million of new revenue by changing the way that everyone in senior leadership is thinking about the organization. So she's a completely different person than when she was 2 years ago when we first met. She gave herself permission to become the leader that she could be.
So I was working with an individual. I wanted to ask you, though, when you're working with a business, how do you set up the design for the meetings? Or what's your process in terms of working with a business?
Well, what we do first is oftentimes we'll have the opportunity to talk to the business owner first,
Okay.
or the leader of the organization if it's a nonprofit organization, whatever, And so we have an initial conversation to begin to understand what their goals and aspirations are. What is it that they would like to have be different than where they are now? Mm-hmm. And we first talk about that, and we think about who else needs to be in the conversation as well. And we also start unpacking what are the landmines. What is the reality of the situation as the leader currently sees it, and what's getting in the way. So with those pieces of information, then we begin to think about, I also ask questions, I should say, about the values of the company and how well the values are being lived out in the company. And I also, ask questions about how involved other leaders are in these kinds of conversations. If they're never involved, then, the next question is, do you want them to be involved? So we sort of get this foundational information out on the table, and then I start working the process with all the tools that I have for facilitation and so forth, and think about a potential design. And then I share that design with the leader for their input. Everything I do is really inclusive, very engaging, because I really want them to co-create it with me. I want them to buy in to everything that I'm going to do every step of the way. And once they feel comfortable, then we bring other people into the room to get input. So it's a real process of helping business owners feel trust with me, mm-hmm. and feel safe to share, what their concerns are. And then we do all the design work together.
So you are the meeting facilitator?
Usually, yes.
Okay. And I know you have several people that work for your organization. Are any of them facilitators also, or do they work with you closely, depending on the size of the group?
Yeah, we're a small practice. I do have a few colleague facilitators that I bring from time to time. Sometimes if it's a very large group, mm-hmm. we'll co-facilitate a meeting because there's a lot going on in a meeting in a really big space, and so sometimes having two people who have a really good working relationship, who can work the whole room together, is really valuable. But most of the time, I facilitate the meetings myself, and my team helps with developing materials and slides, and doing research when we need to do research. There's a lot of things that are involved in getting ready for a big meeting, and so we try to service all the pieces of that.
It sounds like the meeting is the smallest piece. Getting prepared and the preparation behind it all is the big deal.
It is. You're absolutely right. I just did a meeting a couple of weeks ago in Palm Springs, and we spent just a little over 7 months preparing for we did 5 meetings over 3 days. Each meeting ranged from a couple of hours to 4 hours, mm-hmm. to make the best use of that time. They were bringing in leaders from all over the country, very busy, business owners. They don't have time to waste. So we had this 4-hour window, and we had to make every minute count.
So what drives the time frame of the meeting? I guess the topic that they want to resolve, or is it, are most meetings 3 days or 1 day or a week?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that drive the time frame. Sometimes the client will call and say, this is what I've got. I've got 4 hours. I could get my board of directors to commit to this amount of time. Mm-hmm. I need you to figure out how we're going to get to this, achieve the goal that we have in the time that we have. Other times they'll ask, they'll come and say, here's the goal I want to achieve. How much time do you think that it's going to take? I would say on average, most meetings that we facilitate, like single meetings that we facilitate, are between 2 and 6 hours. Okay. After that, people just get really, really, after 6 hours, right. People get really tired. The participants get really tired. I get really tired, and you stop being productive. So if we are in a situation where the process that we're facilitating, for example, if we're working on an organizational or a business culture change initiative, it may take several months and have many facilitated meetings, so it all depends on what the goal is, what we're trying to accomplish, and so sometimes we'll do multiple day meetings, but typically we don't do more than 6-hour meetings.
That word culture, I've heard that a lot. What exactly does that mean? I mean, it seems like, I know it varies from company to company, but and people are looking for a fit to their culture most of the time, but help me, if you can give me some articulation around that. What is a culture?
Yeah, well, first, I can tell you, I wrote a book on organizational culture in nonprofit organizations, so I spent a few years studying this question. And I like to think about organizational culture. The image for it that I like to think about is an iceberg. It's commonly used image with culture. But here's how I use it to define what culture is. The tip of the iceberg are things that you can see in a business. The paintings on the wall, the color of the offices, the layout of the offices, the policies and procedures, the rules and regulations, all of that is one aspect of organizational culture. Close to the waterline where there's still, you see the iceberg above the water, but there's also, you're beginning to move down to the below, starting to touch below the surface where there's still a lot of the iceberg. At the waterline, I put the beliefs and values of the organization. They could be actual values and beliefs, like these are the values we live by in our company, or they could be the espoused values of a leader, like the leader says, this is what's important to me, and I use these things that are important to me to drive our business. So that's on the surface. And then if you remember anything about icebergs from like science class, the biggest part of the iceberg is actually under the surface,
right?
The things that we can't see. And so a big part of organizational culture are the unspoken beliefs and assumptions that get built into the business over the years. Sometimes it could be something that started the day the business started, and it's gotten passed along through the years from generation to generation in the business, or when someone new is hired and they're going through orientation, and they finish the orientation course, and then someone says, but here, let me tell you how it really happens in this organization, right? Okay. They told you it's A, right, but it really happens this way. All of that is culture too. So culture is what we can't see, but we can say we feel it, when we come into a business. We can, if the business is going through a really hard time or it's really heavy, we can feel that, compared to going into a business that might feel lighter and airy. That's all part of culture.
Looking at challenges as a meeting facilitator, what were some of the challenges that you've seen, and how did you go about resolving them or making them better?
Yeah, there's we experience all kinds of challenges. Sometimes there's resistance for people to participate. I remember a number of years ago, I was facilitating a meeting with a group of librarians, and there was a librarian who just was really angry and really frustrated and just sat the whole meeting, sort of slumped in his chair with his arms crossed and was brooding and just would not participate. Wow. And I tried to encourage him to participate, and he wouldn't. And, at a point, I just decided he was making a choice, and I let it go, So he was welcome to stay as long as he was quiet, and we moved on.
Did you ever find out what his issue was, or?
He was just very frustrated with himself, his career.
Okay.
And he just didn't like the conversation, and he was told he had to be there. Yeah. So that sometimes we can, have sidebar conversations and help people come into a conversation, and other times we can't. So that's one challenge. So the other thing that I find is a challenge as a facilitator, no matter how much planning you do, it's entirely possible that you will step on a landmine, that you just, no matter how much planning you do, you totally didn't anticipate something happening. And over the years, I've gotten more and more skilled at saying, okay, well, I didn't see that coming. Let's take a break. I usually, will go and meet with the people who helped me plan the meeting and do a little bit of strategizing about the way to move through it, and then we reconvene. I learned, I would say, in the last 12 years or so, since I went to coaching school, that as a facilitator, there are always lots of resources in the room. And so when you're running into a challenge, the best thing you can do is actually stop and get help and not think that you have to solve it all yourself.
How do you keep a conversation flexible with focus? Because I know there's always people that want to hijack a meeting. They got something they want to talk about. A lot of employees feel like they don't care about me, or some, I don't want to say a lot. Some employees feel like they don't care about me and they got something they want to put on the table that may not be part of the agenda.
Yeah. So I have a practice of when I'm working with a group for the first time and I'm actually facilitating a meeting, I pretty much always insist that the first thing we do is create ground rules or guidelines for working together.
Okay.
And I use a process that's very inclusive of inviting everybody in the room to contribute something to that conversation. I invite them to think about a successful meeting that they attended and what made that meeting successful. And we collect all of those ideas and we chart them up on the board, and we create a list of guidelines for working together. We talk about what those guidelines mean, and then I ask if everyone can live by those guidelines. And so we then use those guidelines if the meeting is going off course a little bit. We can remind ourselves very objectively and say, hey, we agreed to work this way together. So that particular thing is not going in the direction that we said we wanted to go. Let's take a pause and figure out how to get ourselves back on course. So guidelines for working together can be a really invaluable objective tool for helping people who maybe feel a lot of tension work through difficult issues.
In terms of material that you might use in your discovery process with the owners when you start, are you developing that material for the meeting, or how does that go about? Are there any handouts at your meetings?
Yeah, it's a great question. It depends what the purpose of the meeting is.
Okay.
What we're trying to accomplish. But yes, very often, just from the very beginning discovery process, I'm inquiring about what kinds of materials the business already has in place to support different things that they're doing, and if they're missing something, we may use part of the meeting to create that thing that they're missing. So for example, if a business tells me, we really don't have a set of core operating values, we've never created those as a leadership team. I have a lot of different tools that I use to help a business create core operating values, and then we may actually write up a core operating values document. It could be 1 or 2 pages that they've created in the meeting. Then I write it up after the meeting. Then they agree to use it, in their business, and we actually help them think about ways to use those kinds of tools. We write strategic plans. We write operating guides. Whatever the business needs as a result of the discussion that they've had, we also can support that too.
So the meeting happens, everybody goes home. What can a client expect or a business expect as far as follow-up or after the meeting?
Yeah. So for every meeting, we produce a set of notes, which really are a summary of the proceedings, and we make a really valiant effort to capture all the voices, all the conversation that happens, so people can see what they said or their point of view reflected in the material. Mm-hmm. And so they get that set of summary notes. We often have a debrief conversation to understand what they think went really well in the meeting, where we could have done better, and where do they want to go next. And
so debrief with the owners, or
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, debrief typically there will be a group of leaders that we're working with, so it may be an owner and a couple of other people. Or if it's just the owner themselves, it will just be with them, but we want to, usually there are 2 or 3 or 4 people that we work with to get ready for the meeting. And if it's that same group of people that we actually have the meeting with, then we debrief with all of them. It just depends on the size of the business and how many people are, involved. But part of the debrief is to think about the next steps and where do they want to go with what came out of the meeting. We might talk about what they learned and what value it had for the business. And I also want to know what we could have done better. It's part of our process of creating trust with our clients, and we learn a lot from, I never call them really mistakes or failures, because whatever shows up in a meeting, we're going to deal with it. We're going to be successful in dealing with it. But sometimes we don't get all the way where we needed to get in a meeting because something came up that we didn't expect, and we might need to have another meeting.
Denice, this is a great conversation we're having right now. I want to pick this up and continue it next week, if that's okay with you.
I'd love to. Thanks.
We're going to wrap up this episode of Wait What? Financial Matters That Matter for Business and the People That Own Them. If you want to get hold of me, please call me. This is EB at 714-643-2500, and my extension is 420.